Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Author Talk. I'm Dr. Megan Ford, the director of the University of Georgia's Love and Money Center. Excited to welcome Rahkim Sabree. And Rahkim, you are a financial therapist and you have written a book that I want to talk with you more about. And that book is Overcoming Financial Trauma: How to Break Free from Guilt, Build Wealth, and Redefine Success. So thank you, first and foremost, for joining me. And I want to talk with you and just dive right in about this wonderful book and the inspiration behind writing something like this.
Yeah. So my first book on finance was written back in 2019 when I thought I knew. I thought I knew something, and I wanted to take everything that I had learned since then, particularly as it relates to financial therapy and financial trauma. And even the shift in my attitude towards how we have these conversations about financial literacy and what it means to be financially well, and kind of update that, right? So my original intent was to do or slightly reworked version of what was traditional self-published book.
Yeah.
Because I'm working with a traditional publisher, they're like, no, absolutely not. We want something original. Do you have any other ideas? Like, is there something else you could talk about? And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, financial trauma, right? Like, I've been talking about financial trauma almost exclusively for almost half a decade now. Just crazy to say, and the conversations around financial trauma have been getting louder, particularly, within traditional media, right? I'm seeing the phrase financial trauma tossed around in podcasts, on radio, in articles. And I think that there's a lot of ambiguity to the term because it describes something that people may be feeling but may not have the words to label. And when I first started using financial trauma, I didn't hear much in terms of the public talking about it, right? It took me discovering the FTA and diving into what some of the research was saying about financial trauma to really like find my people, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And now you can't get away from it. So I think the book is really timely in terms of where the public acknowledgement of financial trauma is, and that we are all kind of experiencing like this societal harm and we're looking for a way to address that. And then outside of that, I think, certainly from a place of credibility and being able to contribute to the body of work that defines what financial trauma is and how it's interpreted, and what are the different avenues that we can come across financial trauma, that it was very appropriate for me to write a book on this topic exclusively. And so that was kind
Yeah.
of the motivation. There was a little bit of a push, and certainly a lot of a nudge from the publisher to say, hey, we need something different, but also where do you shine in this moment?
That's a really interesting background and story about how it kind of was going to be one thing, but through input and some gentle or maybe not so gentle nudges, it had a new life. And you're right, it is really timely in terms of the conversation. This is a hot topic. You're hearing this more and more in conversation, which, as financial therapists, I think that feels exciting because it's demystifying some of that experience that is, as you said, really connected to many of our backgrounds and many of our stories, and giving a way to identify that in a different way for people that they haven't yet been able to, giving them different words, and in finding through that a new way to approach their money stories. So just really like a powerful and timely resource for people. I'm curious, from your frame, how do you define what financial trauma is? And, I also love that you talked about being able to be a central person in the conversation so that we are kind of, not only are we talking more about this, but we are researching this more thoroughly. As someone in the academic space, that also is exciting. But I think, when we think about research of what something is, defining it becomes important. And of course, there's going to be variation person to person, but I'm curious to know how you think about that and maybe how the book describes it.
Yeah. So the definition I use is financial trauma is any instance observed or experienced that has a negative impact on the way someone views, interacts with, or believes about money. And it's intentionally vague, if that's the appropriate word, because it encompasses so much of our experience that I think I won't call it a problem, but the limitation to the way that financial trauma have been described previously is very much through a lens of pathology. And I think when people hear financial trauma, those two words together, they instantly make associations between, well, there's something wrong with me, right? Like I'm the problem. And this is consistent with the way that traditional financial education has been delivered. There's often shame or guilt based learning and teaching, right? Where you could have, or you should have, or you should be, rather than meeting the individual where they are. And so, intentionally broad, and also in the focus or emphasis on the observation or experience. Because I think many times when someone who is hearing financial trauma for the first time, whether they are, we'll call them a layman, or somebody in the financial space, the immediate association is someone who's experiencing financial hardship, which in turn implies that individuals who are high income earners and or have a high net worth are somehow immune to the impact of financial trauma. And so I pull from a trauma theory in that there are certainly vicarious forms of trauma that are often observed and absorbed, where you may not be the individual that the trauma has been inflicted on, but because of what it is that you've seen or what it is that you've heard, you are now reacting in a very different way. So intentionally broad, but I think encompassing quite a lot. And then within that definition, I point to 6 different sources that I've identified for financial trauma.
Yeah, I think right. That's super useful. Just giving people some parameters for how they might see their experience and a way to find themselves in that definition that is, as you said, de-pathologizing, that tries to take a more normalized approach. It really is something that you have experienced, and maybe that has surrounded you and impacted you. Um, Being able to raise that consciousness for people to see their own money behaviors perhaps through a different lens, maybe through the lens of financial trauma, and removing some of that shame and guilt that happens when it comes to financial trauma. And I think that's really empowering, if we can see it through a new lens, if we can depathologize, if we can de-shame. I mean, we're going to be in much better shape, I think, as we approach the topic, if we're doing it that way.
Yeah, definitely. I think it also creates an avenue for greater promotion of the field of financial therapy and financial counseling as the approaches to both disciplines are often collaborative in that we're not acting as a hierarchical uh, judge or leader. We're often working in tandem with the client to arrive at a point that is more aligned with their value system and however it is that they define that than what it is that we're prescribing as, I'm the expert and you need to listen to me, which particularly when you are dealing with a population of people who may have this internalized distrust towards financial service providers, this kind of creates a greater awareness for financial therapists or financial counselors, the disciplines to be present. So often in these conversations around financial trauma, then the follow up question is, well, where can I find so and
Mm,
so, right? And so,
yeah.
of course, I'm a huge advocate for the FTA and actively involved in the AFCPE community. So it's a logical kind of pass through in that exposure. It's like, hey, there are more financial professionals out there than your CFPs and financial advisors and certainly they have a role to play, but there's more.
Yeah, there's much, much more for sure. I'm curious, you had a moment where you talked about some of the misconceptions around financial trauma that we all carry and many of us carry. One of them being that those in certain economic circumstances or situations don't experience financial trauma. What are some of the other misconceptions that people might hold about financial trauma?
Oof, good question. Usually, with the one that you mentioned is the head scratcher for people. They're
Yeah.
like, "Wait, what?" And I often use like Elon Musk as an example, which you know may or may not be a good example. But I'm like answering your question directly because I was about to go off on a wild tangent.
We're okay with tangents.
I view money behavior through the lens of safety, right? That's it. That's period. And so when we extrapolate all of the different examples or variables that are at play in discussing financial trauma, I can probably draw a string between an individual looking to establish safety through the regulation of their nervous system or through what their financial socialization looks like in dealing with other people. And so, I'll share this because I was watching a video this morning about capitalism and this emerging conversation around anti-capitalism and how the people who were on the video were condemning this emerging thought as like, hey, you can't do anything about the fact that we live in a capitalistic society. And therefore, speaking against capitalism is a useless activity. And, people can have their feelings about that, but I think when we get to the root of how capitalism is practiced, and how it's been practiced recently, we have to acknowledge that it has been an exploitative system, right? It is harmful to groups of people, and also at the same time has been rewarding individuals who are innovative and rewarding by way of extending them, of course, access to more capital, right? But the harm doesn't go away even if you're making money. And so even if we look at trauma theory and the idea that vicarious trauma by way of observation is one thing, but you can also be impacted by vicarious trauma as the individual who is inflicting the trauma onto someone else. And, that's a conversation that's often skipped, like kind of skipped through.
Sure.
Right. And so if we are striving in, this capitalist system to be the capitalist, right? To be the one who's making the money. We also are, regardless of what our intentions are, in the practice of exploiting some system or some people. And that causes harm to us if we are in that role, but it causes harm to the individual who's on the other side of that role. And so it opens up a very large conversation around, ethics and morality. It opens up a conversation around values. It opens up the conversation around the financial systems that we navigate, particularly as, we talk about championing financial literacy and Financial Literacy Month. I have described financial literacy recently as teaching people how to successfully navigate the financial system. Right. And if we simplify it through that lens and not just look at it through a lens of, well, I'm helping people learn how to budget, save, build credit, plan for retirement, navigate financial products and services, then the assumption is that individuals who opt not to participate in these financial systems are then financially illiterate. But that's not really a fair assessment because many people who opt out of navigating financial systems are doing so in a desire to seek safety because they have observed the financial systems causing harm either to them directly or to people within their network or their family, or they are impacted through a generational lens by policies and what have you that have caused harm. And so I'm like, well, that's not a fair assessment because these people may be very well educated in how to navigate these financial systems, but are intentionally opting out. So again, you asked a question about the misconceptions. I think it's becoming widely or much more widely accepted that our money decisions are emotional, right? They're not all rational decisions. But I think even beyond that layer, where it's like we're trying to remove ourselves from our feelings, there is still this I think ever present as human beings desire to feel safe. And so no matter how many feelings you remove from the equation, you're going to do what best positions you for safety because that's how our brains work. Like, that is the point of that's what our brains function is. And, through that lens, what I find fascinating about the topic of financial trauma then is it shows us how much more alike we are than we are different, right? Because you strip away income, asset, race, gender, class, like all of these things. At the root of it, we're humans, humaning, right? And so we're looking for safety. And not only are we looking for safety, but we're looking for safety in community. We're looking for safety in each other.
That's right.
And so that's encouraging from a certain perspective. But I think in order for us to get to that perspective, we have to your point earlier, demystify financial trauma.
Yeah. Wow. Deep thoughts with Rakim. That was amazingly well said. And thank you for helping us sort of like zoom out on, the topic as well. You're speaking my language in terms of systems and, as a trained marriage and family therapist and a financial therapist, we can't ignore the contexts and the systems in which these things and also we are embedded. And so I'm so glad that you called that into the conversation, and talk more about it from that perspective too, and from the perspective of safety. And I think about safety in a relational way, as you noted there at the end, safety in community. And so I think this resource, this book, Overcoming Financial Trauma, really is another opportunity to enter into a safer relationship and a safer community surrounding money, which you and I think, would absolutely agree we all need. So
100%.
yeah. Rakim, this has been an amazing conversation. If people want to learn more about you, your work, financial trauma in general, where should they go?
So I'd point people to my website first. So it's rahkimsabree.com. The book is on the website. And then I speak as, my primary mode of communication. I also write.
Yeah.
So you can find articles on Forbes that I write. I have a Substack newsletter called Overcoming Financial Trauma as well. Certainly, I would point people to FTA. And the directory, I think most important is our huge asset, right? Because then you can find a financial therapist through that directory, and you may select that you want somebody who specializes in financial trauma. And then there are also other programs out there that speak to financial trauma. Chantel Chapman's program, The Trauma of Money, is a phenomenal resource. I've gone through her program, and so I'm not speaking just, on Chantel as a colleague and peer in the space, but as, someone who's gone through her program. I have not engaged with the Center for Financial Social Work, but I have heard great things about their program around financial trauma. For individuals who are looking to go into financial therapy, certainly the CFT education focuses on financial trauma. And so there are resources out there. My caution, and you didn't ask this, but I want to offer it, is that there are conversations being had around financial trauma that from my vantage point, and this is just a personal opinion of Rackham, can be harmful because they're not informed by a lot of the research that has surfaced, whether that be my own or other people's.
Yeah.
And in particular, the coupling of conversations around financial trauma with financial products and services.
Yeah.
And so one example that I see all the time, which is unfortunate, but with life insurance sales, I see kind of an emerging, we'll call it niche of financial sales or financial product sales professionals who are tying in that language so that they can capitalize on the pain that individuals are experiencing through a lens of financial trauma and offering their product or service as the solution being money. And more money doesn't solve the problem of financial trauma. Certainly not by itself, right? It may alleviate one of the sources of financial trauma, which could be financial hardship, but doesn't solve the problem. And so just I would offer that, be careful of
Yeah.
who you take the advice from.
100%. Thank you for offering that caution. I think that's kind of the dark side of some of what exists out there in this space that's, currently kind of like unregulated to some degree. It's like we have good standards and we've made a lot of strides towards legitimizing what it is that, financial therapy is all about. But of course, there are bad actors that will take advantage of some of that. So I'm glad you raised that point, and for those who might watch this and be steered in another direction, I think that's a win for sure. But thank you so much, Rakim, for your time, for your wonderful work in financial trauma. This is such an important topic, and I'm really glad that we were able to scratch the surface together today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.